Your executor may find the will says my share, but the property paperwork gives your spouse the pen. What does share really mean? If you're in a second marriage, your will and your property can pull in different directions. After the first death, your spouse may control the home while your children wait outside it. That gap between expectation and control is where families can get hurt, especially if the mortgage is still being paid and everyone is trying to keep life steady. Most people are asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, can my spouse cut my children out? You should be asking, when I'm gone, who has legal authority to decide what happens next? Once a surviving spouse has that authority, they can usually update their will later, and your children may have no direct say in what you hoped would go to them. The family home, which is often the largest asset and the most emotive, if the home passes to your spouse outright, they're not just living there, they own it, and owners can sell, downsize, remortgage, gift, or leave the property by will to whomever they choose. It might not be an unkind decision, just life kind of happens. If instead your spouse has the right to live there but not full ownership, day-to-day life can look similar, but the power and control is different. The question becomes who can sign the sale, who can release equity, and who has to agree if circumstances change. That's where blended families often find themselves stuck. Not in a dramatic courtroom, but in a slow gridlock with solicitors' letters, delays, and resentment building. One situation that comes up often is a couple who both say the survivor can stay in the house, but never pin down whether that means ownership or just a right to occupy. The children only discover the difference when the survivor wants to move. Now layer in a second marriage. Typically, each spouse can change their own will whenever they like, as long as they have capacity and aren't being pressured. So if your plan relies on your spouse keeping the same will for the rest of their life, that's just a hope. And hope is fragile, especially when someone is grieving or when a new partner arrives or when care needs appear. There's also a timing problem that catches people out. The first death is often when control consolidates. The survivor is the one speaking to the bank, dealing with the insurer, instructing the conveyancer, and making decisions that shape the entire inheritance later. If your children's position depends on your spouse choosing to preserve assets for them, your children are effectively waiting on a future decision made by someone else. So what can you do without turning your home into a battleground? The first shift is to treat remarriage, moving in together, or buying a property together as a trigger to confirm how the property is owned and what that ownership actually allows. The common mistake is actually thinking the will clause about my share of the house does the heavy lifting, when the land registry title and the nature of the ownership of the property may decide who has the pen. A good checkpoint is this. If you asked who can sell the house after the first death, you'd get a confident answer and not just a shrug and I think that's fine. The second shift is to separate being looked after from owning everything. Many couples want the survivor to be secure and both sets of children treated fairly. Those two aims can coexist, but only if the structure matches the intention. The usual mistake is using an all or nothing approach, either leaving everything to the spouse outright or trying to lock everything away so tightly that the survivor can't adapt to real life. A better checkpoint is whether the survivor could still move, pay for care, and live with dignity without needing permission from adult children who may be grieving or suspicious. Even if everyone means well, the survivor's world changes and the plan can get rewritten by life. A new relationship can be great, but it can also change loyalties, priorities, and who's in the ear of the person holding the assets. The third shift is to look beyond the will and ask, what am I accidentally incentivizing? If your spouse inherits everything and your children inherit later, you're asking your spouse to preserve value for people who aren't their beneficiaries in the same way. If your spouse feels your children are distant, ungrateful, or simply not part of their daily life, the emotional pull to redirect assets can be strong and perfectly legal. The common mistake is assuming fairness will be remembered in the same way years later by someone living a completely different life. A useful checkpoint is whether your arrangement would still feel fair if you swap roles and you were the surviving spouse with your own children in the picture. Also, do not ignore assets that sit outside the estate in practice, like a pension death benefit or life cover within the trust. People often align the will but forget the beneficiary choice made years ago, and the cash arrives quickly to the wrong place, which can harden attitudes before anyone's had a calm conversation. Check whether the people you intend to benefit are the people actually named and whether that still matches the family you have now. None of this is about trust. It's about recognizing that in a second marriage, love and legality aren't the same thing. Your executor can only deal with what falls into your estate, and your attorney only matters while you're alive. But ownership and beneficiary choices decide who holds the steering wheel when you're no longer here to explain yourself. The practical next step is to sit with a qualified solicitor or will writer or estate planner and confirm on paper who has control of the home after the first death and what that control allows them to do. The aim isn't to predict every future relationship, it's just to make sure your intentions don't evaporate at the exact moment someone else gains the power to change them. So don't assume your children need a promise, they need a position.